You're not on camera. Yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Paige Brown. I'm the mayor of the city of Gallatin. I'm delighted to welcome those of you who are here in person and those of you who might be watching online. This is our first presentation of Plan Gallatin. A couple of things I want to share with you this evening before we get started. The first one is that this is most people's first exposure to this plan, except the people that have been working on it. And so we're all going to see it together for the first time tonight. And this is not the final plan. This is the Are We on the Right Track plan, taking the feedback that has been received thus far and putting it together. And so that's what we're going to be seeing this evening. So don't look at it and say, oh, this is wonderful or oh, this is terrible, because we are entering the feedback period where we will hear from the public and from council members and planning commissioners and department heads as to where they think that we are not right yet. Another thing I want to do, because I always worry about setting expectations, is talk about what the plan may not be, because I've had some conversations and I've seen some people's comments online about, oh, I hope they put this restaurant here or they put this business there. That's not this plan. This plan is about where a potential investor could put a kind of business or a certain kind of development could be built, or the city needs to make investments in the future, whatever it may be. So this is our long-range land use plan, and we're going to be able to see it for the first time this evening. I also want to tell you just a little bit about the organization that did do the plan for, or is working on the plan for us. Again, it's not complete. And that's the Greater Nashville Regional Council. The Greater Nashville Regional Council, because I think a lot of people think that it's Nashville or it's Nashville Metro Government, and it's not that at all. The Greater Nashville Regional Council was actually established by the General Assembly back in the 60s. Do you remember the year exactly?
65.
1965. It's one of the many development districts located across the state of Tennessee, and it was established for a reason, and that was to help with the regional efforts. It was help to make sure that our state stays livable for years and years and years to come, and it's been functioning for over 50 years. But the Greater Nashville Regional Council also does some important things in our area. They are the Commission for Aging and Disability. They are actually the agency that administers programs and services and provides lots of services for that very valuable, very precious population in our Middle Tennessee region. They do serve 13 counties. I do want to make sure that I tell you that. So it's not just Davidson County and Sumner County and Wilson County. It's 13 counties in the upper Middle Tennessee region. The other thing that the Greater Nashville Regional Council does is they are federally designated as the economic development agency for those same 13 counties. And finally, they are the administrator for the federally mandated Metropolitan Planning Organization. So they are very, very key in programming the funds that are important to all of our region. Those federal dollars and state dollars that come to us for things that are really important, like streets. So that's just kind of a broad overview of what the Greater Nashville Regional Council is. And we contracted with them to establish this plan, largely because they have such an experienced, educated, talented, and diligent staff in the many areas that we need to get this plan, which is the research piece and then, of course, the planning piece. And so that's why we thought that they would be a good choice to do this contract with. This was actually kind of a pilot program for both GNRC and the city of Gallatin to work together on it, but other cities in the region have kind of followed suit and are using GNRC as their planning organization. Now, you should maybe also know that GNRC routinely and has provided planning services for smaller communities, unlike Gallatin, that don't have their own planners on staff. So that's kind of an area that they are well versed in. Now, I probably said something wrong, so this would be an appropriate and perfect point for me to introduce Michael Skipper, who is the leader of the organization, and he can correct anything that I've said that is incorrect, and he will present to you Plan Gallatin, the first draft.
Well, thank you, Mayor Brown. I'm going to go ahead and give this mic to Ms. Turner for later. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you here on what is the near culmination of what has been about an 18-month journey with you all, your local elected officials, your planning department staff, other departments of city government we've spent the last year and a half or so talking about the future of the city of Gallatin with the intent to update your general plan, or another way of calling it, the comprehensive plan for growth and development that was last adopted back in 2009. A lot has changed in Gallatin, a lot has changed in Sumner County, a lot has changed across Middle Tennessee, and so very obviously over the last year, a lot has changed in our nation and the world as well. I want to do one more descriptor of the Greater Nashville Regional Council before I get into sharing with you how you can access the first draft of the plan and how you can go about reviewing and commenting it. But the Greater Nashville Regional Council, the one thing the mayor, she hit all the important parts in terms of the programs and services that it delivers to the Greater Nashville, Middle Tennessee area. But to us as staff, the most important part of the Greater Nashville Regional Council is who it is. The Regional Council is what it sounds like, a regional council that is comprised of or composed of the city and county mayors across those 13 counties that the mayor referred to. And so we actually report to a governing body that is all the mayors in Middle Tennessee who are tasked with working together to solve some of our most critical issues across the region. Transportation, economic development, solid waste is becoming a bigger sort of elephant in the room as it relates to how we're going to manage growth and development into the future. And you should be very proud of your mayor because of the 93 members that are on that council, she is their leader. She serves as the president of the regional council and is very instrumental not only in what happens locally within Gallatin, but what is happening all across Middle Tennessee as we engage our state government and our federal leaders to bring more investment to Middle Tennessee to address a lot of the challenges that are going to be profiled in this first draft of the plan for you. So with that, I'll get into it. Welcome to everybody who is streaming us online. I'm in a room with interested members of the general public and members of the city council. I'm going to try to look at both of you as we go through this. But let me start here, which is a look at the cover. No great reveal here. We're not trying to make a big splash with the cover. What's important here is that I remind everybody that this really all got started within the context of developing an update to your comprehensive plan back in the summer of 2019 at a lawn party right in front of the city hall. And there's a picture from that day where there were well over 100 folks who came to take part in that event. And we've had some nice refreshments and a selfie booth where people and opportunities for people to get hands-on with describing to us the vision that they saw for the future of the city. The other important part of this slide here is the URL at the bottom of the screen, which is plangallatin.org, because everything we're going to cover this evening is available at that website, including an interactive draft plan and then a lot of the supporting documentation that profiles the process and some of the background data that went into what you're looking at. And there is the website. So go there this evening, and you'll be able to click Share Your Vision. You'll get into it, and you'll be able to access that plan. You'll also be able to access a form where you can leave your feedback. But I will reiterate one more thing that the mayor said, which is this is the first draft. And I really need to commend the city government for the approach that they're taking with this. This is the first time a lot of them are seeing the first full draft of the plan, which is a part of any planning process, is to eventually show it to the city staff and the city elected officials. And they chose to receive this first draft with you all. And so you're starting your review at the same time they're starting their review. And so what we've done is we have prepared a draft that we think reflects the vision of the community as expressed by the participants through this process over the last 18 months. Now it's your turn to tell us if we heard the right things. It's the council's turn to let us know if we're on the right track in terms of addressing the specific challenges that are priorities to them. And it's the staff's turn through all the city departments to make sure that the universes that they manage within city government are appropriately reflected in this plan in terms of how their services or infrastructure that they manage should be expanded over time. The other thing I'll say about this plan is very high level. The city has a lot of tools to manage growth. This is the first of those tools. This is the tool that seeks to get everybody on the same page as to how the city is going to grow into the future, to document how you all would like to see it grow, so that the city has a proper chance at aligning its resources and subsequent decision-making to implementing that vision. There are a lot of other tools that will be used to manage growth, some of which will need to be updated now as a result of this comprehensive plan update. But tools like zoning code, which the mayor mentioned that this is not a plan that's going to cite a specific retail outlet, but it is a plan that will guide the zoning code, which will be much more instrumental in explaining to individuals what they can and possibly cannot do with their property. So this is not the document that says that. It's the document that sets up those additional tools that are a little bit more refined to do their job in a way that meets the expectations of the community at large. A little bit about the process before I get into the document itself. I mentioned this is a process that was launched right outside on the lawn in the summer of 2019. That was really phase one, the launch of phase one. There were 3 phases to this process. There was a community visioning phase, a scenario planning phase, and a plan drafting phase. And another way of looking at those phases is that phase one was really where we were going around and just doing a lot of listening. The lawn party was the first stop, but then we went out and had essentially town hall workshops, which with each of the council members in their districts to get a little bit more granular in conversation with residents within those districts. But there's just a lot of listening that was happening throughout the summer and fall of 2019. And the questions that we were asking were things like, what do you like about living in your community today? What do you wish was better? What do you anticipate for the future? How would you like the future to look like? What would a successful Gallatin look like in the year 2045? Right? I know the year 2045 sounds a long time into the future, but it's closer to us in time today than 1990 is. Right? It's closer to us than 1990 is backwards. So that was phase one, community visioning, which went through the rest of 2019. 2020, y'all remember that year, I'm sure, was the year of scenario planning. And so what we did with that basically is we put together some growth models to predict the future based on your current trajectory. And we shared with you how you would expect Gallatin to perform in terms of traffic congestion or the loss of open space, or just basically how you would perform or meet the expectations that you wanted for the city by fast forwarding using the futuristic computer models to predict what would happen in the future based on your current trajectory. And then we brought to you some alternatives to that trajectory. So what if scenarios? What if you grew more like this? Or what if you grew more like that? How would it change the outcomes that you would be experiencing in a day-to-day way as a resident of the city in the future? And the purpose of this was to make sure everybody was starting from the same place in terms of an understanding of what influences traffic congestion, what influences our ability to protect prime agricultural land or to make sure that there's open space out there, what influences the degree to which you need to expand water and sewer infrastructure, right? We wanted everybody to understand the levers. And now that you understand the levers, then we re-ask these questions that we started with. Now, what do you imagine for the future? And what we found in a big workshop that we had virtually in June of, well, we had it for real, but it was online, I guess is the better way of saying that. So on June 4th, we had a big virtual workshop where we presented the grand results of all these scenarios, and then we did a few online workshops with smaller groups to discuss the implications, and then re-ask those questions, and then ask people if they changed their minds. So coming into this process, what did you think? What do you think now? And did you change your mind? And a majority of people shifted their thinking about how the city should grow and develop. Not because they thought their previous opinions were wrong. It's just knowing what I know now about that type of development and how it impacts traffic congestion or limits my opportunities for growth. I think I probably would like to make a different decision. So we gave people that second chance to tell us what they imagined for the community. And then we entered the third phase, which is plan drafting, which is essentially where we try to translate your expectations into a set of high-level policies. And I'll describe what I mean by policies here in a second when I get into the actual document. And that's where we are now. So we've produced about 100 pages. There's a lot of graphics in there. So it's not, we try to make sure you don't have to read a book to understand what the city is describing about its future, but about 100 pages that's attempting to translate the things that we heard dating back to the summer of 2019. And then the plan adoption process, the schedule for this is up to everybody in this room and everybody watching online. So the pace of this will be at the comfort level of the Planning Commission and the City Council, which will certainly be influenced by the type of feedback that they get. All right, so that's an overview of the process. We'll go ahead and get into the plan. So again, this is a look at the cover. I'm going to go ahead and flip inside and basically just browse through. I'm not going to go through a lot of the pages of the plan, but I want to go through each of the 9 chapters that are available to you right now online and talk a little bit about what you can expect to find in them. There's a lot of work that we're going to do together over the next few months to dig into the details, so this is not a details night. But chapter 1, what you're going to find there is really good background and reasoning for why this city even has a comprehensive plan. Some of it is born out of legalese, right? The state law actually expects local governments to have a general plan that describes how it will manage growth into the future. But more importantly, your city leadership just wants to be responsive, a responsive government, to make sure its policies and its actions, and actions could be budgeting and deciding where to invest funds into infrastructure. They want to make sure that those actions, those decisions that they're making week to week, month to month, are reflective of the direction that you want to head. So chapter 1 is going to give you a look at all the background reasons why you have a comprehensive plan. You've had one, why you're updating it. It's also going to present you a list of frequently asked questions. So questions about the difference between the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance, for example, or types of questions that you're going to get out of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is going to take you on a brief journey of the establishment of the city of Gallatin all the way through to where we are today. And it's going to end in a community snapshot. So basically a dashboard that's going to show you things about yourself, the sort of demographic makeup, the makeup of your economy. We get into issues of housing affordability and your workforce. But it's a snapshot of characteristics of the city of Gallatin that make it unique, but they're also indicators of things that might be going well or not going well. This is just the front door. So if you go to the PLANGALLATIN.org, I was trying to plug GNRC.org too, you might as well go there as well. But PLANGALLATIN.org, you'll be able to interact with a version of this dashboard and in additional data as well that went into the effort. But this, like I mentioned, is going to take you through a journey of your history of development. It's going to feed into chapter 3, which is all about envisioning the future. And this chapter starts out by describing some of the growth forecasts that have been prepared for Middle Tennessee. So data scientists and planners and researchers and economists have all prepared a forecast of what Middle Tennessee will look like by the year 2045, and I can tell you it'll be approaching 3 million people by then, making it about as big as present-day Denver metro area, for if you need a comparison for what 3 million people could look like in a region. So that's our trajectory, and so what we did is we took those regional forecasts and drilled down to the more localized level to look at how those people and jobs would manifest within the planning area for Gallatin. And then we shared those results with you, and this chapter is going to capture some of what we heard in the initial visioning sessions. And there were really 6 things that we heard repeatedly through the early public involvement process. The community did not question this process. The community wants the city to be proactive in planning for future growth and development. Transportation. That was often the top thing on people's minds at most of the workshops is what are we going to do about traffic congestion? What are we going to do about having better walkability? What are we going to do about better connecting Gallatin to the rest of the region since we have a shared economic economic opportunity? People wanted to see Gallatin's economy diversify and provide a greater range of job opportunities so that people, if they do leave to go to college, that they have a place to come back to. Natural beauty. People were concerned about the rapid growth and development interfering with the natural beauty of the surrounding environment. And the fifth one was about community focus. And this is one of the things I talked a lot about throughout the process, is that in all of the comprehensive planning efforts that I've been a part of, no more than with this process, when we asked people to describe their community or what they wanted out of their community, they used terms of passion more than they used terms that express like what they wanted as something to look like, right? They didn't describe it physically, they described it emotionally, which meant a lot to us. And really, we wanted to do justice to the fact that you want a connected community. You want people to feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves here in the city of Gallatin. And speaking of unique identity, this idea of defining spaces that you want, a lot of you appreciate being within a fast-growing metropolitan region, but you want to preserve the unique identity of Gallatin and make it clear to people when they've arrived into the city. No matter how much we grow together as a region, you don't want to give up or sacrifice the ability to delineate when you have come and gone from the city of Gallatin physically. So moving on, this is a look at some of the scenario planning we did. And again, you can go explore this data on your own. Just graphical representations of a few scenarios that we ran and the way we tested the performance of each of these future scenarios according to performance measures that reflected the goals that you were expressing to us early on. And basically, the bottom line here is, how you choose to grow is going to matter when it comes to how well the community performs in the future. By community, I mean, your infrastructure. It's going to impact your quality of life. The decisions you're making every day are going to be influential on those outcomes. So here are some high-level, I guess these were sort of some headlines that we derived from the conversations that we had with you. One is that, for all of the conversations that are had on a regular basis about specific developments in the city of Gallatin, and we won't get into that this evening, most people don't think that development is inherently bad. People understand that communities are going to continue to grow. And so I thought that was a really important point, is that the development is not inherently bad, but how it manifests itself and where it goes will obviously have an influence on your perception of how well it was built. Another is that the city should evolve into a more compact and walkable community. I don't think I expected that coming into this, but a lot of people that live in Gallatin aren't just facing Nashville. They're thinking introspectively about their own community, and they want their neighborhoods to be safe and walkable. And not just for recreational purposes, but how awesome would it be to leave your car in the garage and go get a cup of coffee or go see a friend or go out to eat. And people just really elevated that as an issue. Another issue that was elevated was the issue of housing. And the sort of the acknowledgement here through these conversations is that this is a very complex issue, right? It's easy to boil down the housing issue to single-family homes versus apartments. It's not that simple. Housing is about giving your workforce and your children, your parents, a place to live in their community. And the only way to strike a balance of affordability is in diversifying those options. The diversity strengthens your portfolio in the same way that diversity in your stock portfolio protects you from vulnerabilities into the future from a financial standpoint. But it's not complex, and there's a lot of emotion and passion that goes into dealing with the housing issue. But we need to think inclusively about how we make sure that people have a place to live in Gallatin. And not everybody wants the same thing, which is a good thing, but presents a challenge. And then finally, again, transportation is key, but I could also say it's king because it's the number one thing that's on most people's minds. So in this chapter is going to end with a look at the policy framework. So this document as a whole is a policy, more than that it contains policies, okay? So the document as a whole is the policy that the city will have as it relates to growth and development into the future, which will influence other decisions that the city is making. And that policy framework is built off a guiding vision and a set of core values that were reinforced. These pre-existed this Plan Gallatin effort, but they were reaffirmed through the Plan Gallatin effort. Those that vision and those values translate into 4 goals to keep it simple in terms of focusing on priorities. Goal 1 is to build a prosperous economy. Goal 2 is to create a sense of place. Goal 3 is to provide a livable community. And goal 4 is to invest in quality infrastructure. And within each of these goal areas, there are a set of objectives, a little bit more specific and a little bit more temporal in nature in terms of, these are things that you can map on a schedule in terms of how well you're achieving them. And so you'll have an opportunity to go through and explore these goals and these objectives. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is the first of 4 chapters that are going to dig into those goals a little bit more in depth. The first of those, goal number 1, which was to build a prosperous economy, is going to present to you, I don't have those pages, but you can see them online. It's basically going to frame for you, like what are the ingredients for a successful economy? And then you're going to have, at least in the online experience, an opportunity to dig into how well you have or don't have some of those ingredients, right? And that's always a ever-changing thing. It's just based on current circumstances, which are changing day to day. So that's the other thing I'll say about this plan. There will be a document, but the plan is really more interactive online and is more fluid because data indicators are constantly changing. So what you're going to find is a little bit more information about the objectives that go into this goal, and then a series of recommended actions. Some of these actions may be specific things that you would do in the form of an investment, and some of them may be policy guidance.
Data recommenders. What does that mean?
Data.
You said it'd be full of data recommenders.
Oh, data. You'll just be able to explore the data online. I think my enunciation this time of day is, yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for that. But you can dig into this goal area and learn a little bit more about what it takes to have a good economy, and some specific, see, there I go, some specific recommendations for how you can achieve that over time. Here's the opportunity for us, though, is that depending on the actions that y'all gravitate to, we can prioritize those and unpack them a little bit more as we get to the second draft. So some actions seem more favorable to you. Then we go to another level of detail and talk more specifically about how you might position yourself to take that action. Okay, so that is another thing that is yet to come. But first, like the mayor said, are we on the right track or not with respect to the recommendations? This chapter, number 5, addresses the second goal, which is about preserving your character and creating a sense of place. Like with the last chapter, you'll get access to those objectives, some discussion about what goes into preserving character and identity, and then a list of proposed actions, some of which you may really love and want to dig deeper. And again, draft 2 can explore those at a higher, a more granular level as we go through this iteratively with you. Chapter 7 is about goal 3, which is, I skipped over the livable community, which is probably the most important, which is this is all about ensuring that the community is welcoming, inclusive, affordable for anybody who wants to live here. And you need everybody who wants to live here to be able to live here in a managed way in order for you to continue a successful path to the future. And then 7 is all about infrastructure. And the point here is that there's some work that we need to do together, not just to finish this plan, but subsequently to align your investment priorities into infrastructure with the vision that you want to build, right? If you look at, and you can see this in the document itself, how am I doing on time, Rosemary? Good? We have, thank you so much, sir. We actually have, there's an interactive map on the website too, but in the document you can flip through 4 maps. They're aerial maps that date back to 1950. And if you were living in Gallatin in the 1950s, you'll know very much that most of Gallatin's growth happened after that period, right? After a lot of infrastructure was built in the 50s. We're talking about the lake being built, which provide hydroelectric power, the interstate eventually being built there in the 60s, and some of the other major roads. When you follow the aerials and you see where these infrastructure investments are made, it's then not long after that the subdivisions and the neighborhoods start popping up. It's just really fascinating to watch what's happening. And the last 2 maps in the document that are in the series are 2016 to today. And those 2 maps are probably more different from each other than any other 2 maps in the plan. It is just amazing to see from, 8,000 feet in the air. How much has changed in just the last 5 years? But
So
you,
when you're done, can we ask you a couple of questions? Because like, if you want to move to this town and build a company, you would think it was prosperous, right?
well, that's I'd maybe afterwards you could reach out and we could talk about some of that. But we'll leave that to the discretion of the council in terms of the presentation. So for the Chapter 8, all right, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9, this is the home stretch. Chapter 8 is going to be presenting to you how to manage the land use of the community, right? And so what I'd like to do, one, you probably need a break from me, but two, our land use planner that's most responsible for working with the city on this really important aspect of the plan is prepared to walk you through the approach to land use planning, which is a little non-traditional, at least from a historic standpoint. You know, there's been a lot of evolution in the way we think about land use planning. So Mary Turner with GNRC is going to walk you through how we approach that.
Hi, everybody. Mary Turner, and as Michael said, I'm a land use planner with GNRC. You all hear me okay? Hold it closer. There it is. Okay. So as Michael mentioned, previously, the previous development plan, Gallatin on the Move, took an approach to land use that posted emphasis more on the character and pattern of development as opposed to focusing on relegating specific land uses. So in Plan Gallatin, we continued that approach and then put a little bit more emphasis to further refine it so the community can define its long-term vision and still have the flexibility of taking advantage of opportunities as they present themselves unexpectedly. So in the plan, we've organized the land uses to guide and think about in terms of character areas. And these character areas range in intensity from the most rural of the character areas all the way up to the most urban development pattern. And there are 5 character areas that are represented, and you can see them in the map here, starting with the most low level of intensity and development. There's the natural or conservation character area, and then we move to the rural countryside, the suburban, the general urban, and the downtown core. And each of these character areas are described in the plan in terms of kind of the character of what kind of patterns of development would be expected in those areas by a number of different elements, including land use, transportation, open space, density, and the typical form. On the screen here, we have a spread of one of the general urban character area pages, and each of the character areas has a spread that's laid out in terms of a page that looks like this. So I'm going to walk through kind of the elements that are defined for each of the character areas with this screen here to give you an overview of how to read the page so that you're able to understand the plan as you're looking through it. Starting with the density or intensity for each character area. As I mentioned, the areas are arranged in terms of the natural and conservation being kind of the least intense all the way up to the downtown core, which would be the most intense and highest density of uses. But as these pages are laid out, there is also kind of a range of the lowest density that you'd expect in the left-hand pages of the character area to the highest form of density in the right-hand page of the character area, and kind of a middle, down the middle. And that is further defined in the density key that we have at the bottom of the page and the description of the density for the character area down there. Overall, something to note for this is it's not necessarily a breakdown of what density would be expected at a parcel level. It's more kind of a summary of what's on the character area as a whole. And then I'm going to go down the page on the left-hand side. The first element that's kind of defined per character area would be land use. And this land use portion of the plan, character area description, doesn't necessarily focus on allowable land uses for this area of the city as they're defined, but more comments on the mix of uses that we'd expect. So for example, in the natural or conservation character area, which is the lowest and least intense, the mix of uses is going to be more in the range of agricultural, open space, passive recreation, and then in the downtown core, the mix of uses that we'd expect is going to be higher towards residential, office, mixed use, kind of all together in more mid-rise or high-rise buildings. In the middle of the page, there's the transportation portion on each page, and this talks about what we'd expect in the street network per character area, as well as what access management policies might be appropriate, and also comments on what elements you'd expect in the multimodal network, so the pedestrian connectivity and the bicycle network. And then down at the bottom of the page, there is the open space element. And open space can be achieved through all kinds of different forms. So that could go from something that's very passive all the way up to kind of active and program spaces. So for example, in the natural or conservation character area, you'd expect to see more unprogrammed open space and conserved areas. But then once we get towards the general urban, like this is, open space is going to take the form of being more active and recreational uses and could be programmed into parks, squares, even the downtown plaza would be a form of open space. And the last bottom of the page here that I'll touch on over here on the left is the comment on the typical form. And for every page, this is going to lay out what height the buildings might be, as well as what kind of setbacks and what parking layout you might expect. So this is where the form of the buildings is going to be commented on in the design of the buildings in the character areas. And down here is the less suitable box, and this is really just kind of giving you 5 ideas of what is less desirable or wouldn't necessarily be appropriate per character area. In addition to the 5 base character areas that we have, there's also been the identification of sub-area designations. And these sub-area designations, there's 3 types. There's the mixed-use commercial districts, major employment centers, and mixed-use activity centers. And as you can see on the map, we identified 9A and 9B, but 9 specific sub-areas that will have kind of a deeper dive or might have a higher intensity of uses or a different set of uses than what is represented in that base character area and could use additional guidance. So following the adoption of the comprehensive plan, these 9 areas would be areas that the community is going to look into for having specific sub-area plans that give additional guidance beyond what's in those base character areas. Okay, and that would be chapter 8. And hand it back to Michael to continue through the rest of the document.
Thank you, Mary. So that is a look at how the plan approaches your land use policy. There's also information in this plan that provides an expression of how much change is actually expected or desired in certain parts of the city. Okay, so you're going to be able to see a map that's going to show you like this part of the city is not expected to grow or it's not desirable to have a rapid pace of growth, whereas another area of the city may be very much positioned for very intentional growth, which is a good thing to identify in your comprehensive plan because that's what's going to help you align your local budgeting and your decisions about infrastructure investments to the areas that are desirable for growth versus those that are not. There's another designation in that same map that is sort of a nurture designation, and these are places that you may view as already being built out, so your historic neighborhoods, the areas around downtown, or just places that really, there might be a little bit of redevelopment, but as it occurs, it's important that it be supportive of what's already there. And so it's called the nurture category, and that's really a message to the city that these neighborhoods shouldn't be forgotten in the conversation about growth and development, that reinvesting in historic neighborhoods, and by historic, I don't mean just the one building that you saved, from 100 years ago. It's the neighborhoods that have been here for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years that are really where a lot of your blue collar and just your everyday households like me are living that need to not be forgotten in the conversations about growth. And they may need sidewalks just as much as the new developments that are being built out there today. So moving on to the last chapter as we come up on our time, last chapter is all about taking action. So we mentioned the comprehensive plan is really the first major step in getting on your way towards achieving a vision. There are a lot of other steps, and we wanted to point out some of what those other steps were. And I'll give you a couple of examples that are profiled in here. One is there's a pending amendment to the urban growth boundary, which is a really influential aspect of planning in Tennessee. It's a way for cities to communicate with each other in the county government as to where growth is going to happen in a much broader area. And so you have an urban growth boundary whether you knew it or not, that extends beyond your city limits. And it's your way of telling Hendersonville and Sumner County government how you intend to grow into the future. And so a lot of the policies that we have in here, it applies to the urban growth boundary too, but your regulatory tools would only apply to the properties within the city limits. So there's a pending amendment to that urban growth boundary, some conversations that have happened across the county about where growth should go that would need to be finalized, right, for us to make sure that the policies are appropriately aligned. Another thing that you'll want to do after the adoption, again, however long that takes, we want you to be comfortable, but once you do adopt, it's those regulatory tools that you possess that actually are governing the day-to-day transactions. The zoning code, for example, should be updated so that it's a tool that's going to help you implement this vision versus whatever vision was in place at the time that zoning code was last updated in a major way. We're also recommending, I see one of our planning colleagues in the room who will appreciate this next comment, that you do more to get away from that parcel-to-parcel land use-based zoning and more to like a form-based code, which allows you to, instead of governing what you can do precisely with a piece of land, it's more about the form that that development takes and the way it complements and interacts with its surroundings. Because uses change over time. So it's important that the things that we build are adaptable to a changing environment. So it is about that three-dimensional envelope that really exists on these properties. And thinking more about that than just the idea of separating. You know, old school planning, one of the reasons why this exists in America is to keep the pig farms away from the neighborhoods, right? So that's sort of the old way of thinking about land use planning. And so the zoning code update and moving towards a form-based code, which probably sounds Greek to a lot of people online, is going to be something that you're going to want to pursue. Aligning your budgeting process to the comp plan, which I think the city officials will welcome. Having the guidance from you as expressed through this vision to feel confident that the way they're prioritizing projects is in line with what your expectations are to begin with. And so we would recommend very merit-based process for evaluating the capital projects. And I mean by this, like roadway widening, sidewalk projects, new water infrastructure, police, fire. All those are competing for, in some cases, a lot of the same pots of money. And so how do you sort those out? How do you prioritize one thing over the other when it's all important? This is going to be an influence on how you prioritize. So those are some examples of next steps that we've identified. Of course, your most immediate next step is to review the draft, which again is available in a first draft form. We're taking any comments on typos you want to provide as well, but it is really more about substance. So there's a form online. You can go flip through this online. You don't even have to print it out. You can zoom out. You can then leave your feedback. I will say that anything you like about this plan, the credit goes to City Council, Planning Commission, and the Planning Department staff. And I don't say that flippantly. I mean, we're not the authors of this plan. We're facilitators. And so if you like something, it was because we heard it from them. We heard it from you. And they made sure that we put it in there. If anything raises eyebrows or just isn't well written or the graphic isn't readable, that's our fault. And so we want to know when that is the case, and we can get it fixed before the second draft. So with that, I think the last thing I'll do is remind everybody that this is online at PLANGALLATIN.org. So if you aren't able to see the slides that I went through, you have direct access to that right now. If you need any assistance with that, I guess you can email me at this fun thing to do on live stream, right? mskipper@gnrc.org. Because did we track down you would know, the email address that we're using for Plan Gallatin?
I thought you had comments that...
I double-checked that. No, that's not. So we'll get that clarified, maybe post it on Facebook. You could also share the document from the website if you have friends, family who want to see it. Also, take a look at the acknowledgements page. There was a lot of representation from city government, and that will continue to happen as we get through this process. But we work very closely with a community group that was made up of really important organizations outside of government throughout this process, and even just individual community leaders who are recommended for that role. It was just sort of our way of keeping a pulse of how people were perceiving the conversation that we're having with the community at large. So I want to thank all the people who participated in that, because that was completely voluntary and for the benefit of everyone. So thank you to Mary, and I didn't introduce Jessica Hill, who's our Community and Regional Planning Director, who oversees all of our planning work. And just thank you to Rosemary and Bill McCord and Josh King and the planning staff. Nick is in the room for the partnership. And I look forward to getting your comments and starting work on draft number 2. Mayor?
Well, Mr. Skipper, your comments. There we go. Mr. Skipper, your comments were very generous, and we appreciate the acknowledgments, but I appreciate the hard work that you at GNRC have done, and I know that our staff has worked very hard. And so now we all get to delve in and see what's there and provide our feedback, and you can provide the feedback right online, correct? So I would encourage you to do that. I know that people that have probably watched tonight are looking at this saying, wait, we don't want any growth, and that's going to be the challenge going forward. I mean, that $3 million, not $3 million, that 3 million people projection is not new. I mean, that's been around for, I know, over a decade. And I think that's the reality. And if you've seen what housing prices are doing in our area, and the unaffordability that so many of our residents are facing, it is critical to find accommodations for people that they can actually afford. So it's difficult challenges ahead, but I think Gallatin is well prepared for it. I think one of the reasons that we remain so appealing to people who want to invest is that we do have such capacity, David Kellogg, on our sewer, water, gas infrastructure. Having so much capacity and having our own utilities continues to make us very appealing, yet we still don't have enough inventory to accommodate the people who, like you mentioned, are either trying to downsize or whose children have graduated college or who work for the city of Gallatin. I mean, that is the reality that we are facing every single day. And people that do want to do those things, they won't sell their homes. So we've stopped the movement in the market related to housing. So I like the approach that you all have taken as far as the character areas go. I know that people are going to be looking for those open space tracts, the areas that aren't developed. Again, the city of Gallatin cannot go and say no development here. They can, because people own property. They have a right. They pay for that property. They maintain that property. They have a right to sell it, make money off of it, and have it turned into something different at some point if they so desire. There really isn't a lot of agriculture still happening in our city. But anyway, you don't need me to preach all of this. So just really appreciate you all's work on this. Appreciate so much the public that has stayed engaged and stayed interested. And it's very obvious that you care so much about our city, and that matters. And that's going to help us continue on a good trajectory and have a new plan that takes us well into the future. And that goes for the people who are here in person and the people who are watching online. Rosemary, you have a comment.
Just would like you to remind or tell people there'll be a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and City Council, and then it goes through Planning Commission, City Council, and there will be at least 2 opportunities for public hearings.
Okay, Rosemary was making the point, you all should know, that there will, in a few weeks, be a joint meeting of the City Council and the Planning Commission, and then it will go through both the Planning Commission and the City Council, and those meetings will have opportunities for public comment. You, of course, have the opportunity online to provide feedback anytime between now and then, so please, please, please do that. I do want to ask if there are, we're getting close to meeting time, but we've still got a few minutes. I think it's appropriate to see if anybody here has any questions. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to know how and when, if we're going to put this in place, and I'm not arguing putting it in place, I think you have to plan growth and all of that. I've come from smaller towns that have gotten bigger, and I do understand that. What I'm trying to figure out is at what point do we slow down our approvals in order to get this plan in place? Because as soon as you start rezonings, because as soon as you keep saying, okay, you can build 47 over here and 12 over here and 19 over there and all of this, that's before we've got this in place. And this keeps moving. So how do you stop that in order to be able to do this right?
I'd love to answer that question, but thankfully it's not one for me to answer. So.
I'll jump. And Mr. McCord or someone else may want to, or some of the council members may want to interject as well. We have an existing plan, and we have had a plan since '08 or '09. So, right, I understand that, but I don't think that you're going to have tremendous differences in character areas. You're going to have new incorporations, and again, I mean, we are trying to accommodate the people that are moving to Middle Tennessee. And so I don't see a scenario in which there is no approvals. I mean, that would be devastating to people who either were trying to sell their property or invest their money. So
It's the rezoning part of it. Not that they can't sell their property, but the rezoning it.
well,
I'll give you the meadows, just bring up the meadow. Okay?
yeah, yeah,
Where you're sticking the
yeah,
1,050.
yeah.
Miller, I'm sorry, online, people can't hear you.
Right, and I'm happy to have a conversation about it, but I think when you look at a lot of the rezonings that have happened, and you look at them, not all of them, and I haven't been in agreement with some of them, and others haven't either, but when you look at the rezonings that we have done over the past many years, they've aligned with the growth plan. Doesn't mean people have liked them, but they have aligned with the growth plan. That's why it's very, very important to engage on this one, and why so many people have. And sure. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm tired. Well, my watch is probably slow. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Yeah, Mr. Skinner, you mentioned keeping pig farms away from the neighborhoods. So it is true that government's job is to protect people's property rights when you get down to the basics. What about the pig farmer who was there first? The pigs, it's not their fault, you know? And what if the pig farmer wants to keep his pig farm, but then the guy next door sells his farm and turns it into a neighborhood? So
Right.
I have a problem with like keeping pig farms away from neighborhoods when really like people have a right to do what they want to with their property, including farms.
Well, so the example obviously is a very dated example, right? But it's sort of some of the history of planning in America, and it is about property rights. And a lot of that is, and it's not, the courts have decided case to case whether the pig farmer or the neighbor has been injustice or not, right? So the courts decide that based on the individual circumstances. I guess what I'm saying is that we need to get away from specific governing by use to use and think more about, I mentioned this in the context of governing more about form and function and the way something blends into the community in a very complementary and in a way that enriches the value of the community as a whole. I think the one thing to keep in mind, though, with respect to property rights is what the courts have decided over the years is that your expression of your rights on your land can have an impact on the rights of somebody on land next to it. And that's what makes planning important. Also, what makes it very complicated. It is basically, it's conflict management between two non-competing or two non-complementary uses that are both have a right, but they don't have a right to infringe upon each other. So what is going to be the process to work through that is legal within the framework provided to us by the Constitution and state laws? So that's the balancing act. I want to be clear to everybody online that I'm not advocating against the pig farmers. I would be perfectly fine with the pig next door in my situation personally. But in terms of the history of planning, it was really much about, hey, I don't want somebody doing that with their property next door, and we're trying to get away from that, was the point that I was making.
Well, and it's difficult when those different uses meet, because there's always a point where they have to meet. With that, we have a meeting starting in a few minutes. We need to transition so that we're ready to start that. We will have, again, public comment as time goes by. Your feedback is welcome. On the website mentioned, which is plangallatin.org, but also, to our council members, to me, to our planning staff, feel free to interact on this because the more, and tell people about it because there's still a lot of people who are missing that probably have really good observations, suggestions, ideas, criticism to submit to this plan. And we want to make it as great as we possibly can because it's supposed to work for us for a lot of years into the future. So thank you all again so much. I hope you have a great evening. Please stick around for the council meeting or the council work session if you so desire. Y'all have a good night.